Last winter, I rented a small cabin on a remote island off the coast of Washington State. At the time, I was mentally exhausted and desperate to get away from everything. My life had become a mess, and I just needed silence for a few days. A coworker told me about the island during a late shift at work. He said barely anyone stayed there overnight during the colder months. No tourists, no traffic, no distractions, just ocean waves and empty forests. It sounded perfect. The cabin sat alone near the shoreline, surrounded by thick pine trees and tall grass that constantly moved in the freezing wind. It looked old, almost abandoned, but the online photos made it seem cozy enough. When I arrived just before sunset, the owner wasn't there. He had left the key hidden under a rusted lantern beside the porch. Attached to it was a folded note. "Lock every door after midnight." I laughed when I read it. I shouldn't have. That evening, I explored the island for a while. Most businesses closed early, and by 9 p.m. the harbor town looked completely deserted. Before heading back to the cabin, I stopped at a small diner near the docks. The waitress asked where I was staying. The second I mentioned the cabin, her face changed. "You should leave before the last ferry tomorrow," she said quietly. I asked her why, but she walked away without answering. By the time I got back to the cabin, heavy fog had rolled in from the ocean. Visibility was terrible. The trees around the property swayed violently, making long scratching noises against the walls. Around midnight, the power suddenly went out. The cabin fell into complete darkness. At first, I thought the storm had knocked the electricity out. But then I noticed something strange. The wind outside had completely stopped. No waves, no insects, nothing. The silence felt unnatural. Then came the footsteps. Crunch, crunch. Slow footsteps moving across the gravel path outside the cabin. I held my breath and listened carefully as whoever it was approached the porch. The footsteps stopped directly outside the front door. A few seconds later, someone slowly tried the handle. Click, click. The deadbolt rattled. I grabbed my flashlight and backed away from the entrance. Then came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not loud, almost polite. I didn't answer. For about a minute, nothing happened. Then I heard the footsteps moving again, circling the cabin slowly. Whoever it was walked past the kitchen wall, then the bathroom, then stopped outside my bedroom window. My bright flashlight suddenly shined through the curtains. I nearly screamed. I stayed completely still as the beam moved around the room, searching. Then the light switched off. A man's voice whispered from outside the glass. "Daniel, open the door." Every hair on my body stood up. I had never told anyone on the island my name. The voice started laughing softly, not normal laughter. It sounded wet, broken, like someone trying to imitate a human voice without understanding how. I finally forced myself to peek through the curtain. I instantly regretted it. Standing outside the window was a tall figure wearing a dark raincoat soaked with seawater. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, and even in the darkness, I could see its face wasn't normal. Its skin looked pale gray, its mouth stretched too wide, and its eyes were completely black. The figure smiled the moment it realized I was looking at it. Then it slowly lifted one hand and pointed toward the front door. The deadbolt suddenly began shaking violently. Bang, bang, bang. The entire cabin rattled as something slammed against the entrance from outside. I ran into the bathroom and locked myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. Then I heard it enter the cabin. Heavy, wet footsteps moved slowly across the wooden floorboards outside. Thud. 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 The thing walked through every room one by one, almost like it was searching for me. Then the footsteps stopped directly outside the bathroom door. Silence. I covered my mouth to stop myself from breathing too loudly. A few seconds later, something scratched the wood gently from the other side. Scrape. Scrape. Then came the whisper. "You should have stayed asleep." The bathroom lights suddenly flickered back on by themselves. At that exact moment, the scratching stopped. The footsteps retreated slowly through the cabin. Then silence returned. When morning finally came, the front door was wide open. Seawater covered the floor. But what terrified me most were the footprints. They weren't human. Each footprint looked long and distorted, almost like webbed claws pressed into the wet wood. I left the island immediately and never returned. 3 months later, I moved into a small apartment in Seattle and tried convincing myself the entire thing had been stress-induced paranoia. Until one night during a thunderstorm, I woke up around 3:00 a.m. to the sound of water dripping onto my bedroom floor. I sat up slowly. Wet footprints stretched from my apartment window all the way to the side of my bed, and written across the fogged glass beside me were 6 words. "You left the door open this time." About 6 years ago, I traveled to South Korea for a research project involving abandoned industrial structures near coastal areas. I was working as an architectural surveyor back then, and part of my job involved documenting unsafe buildings before demolition crews moved in. One location in particular caught my attention: an abandoned prison facility built on a small isolated island several miles away from the mainland. Officially, the prison had been shut down in the early 1980s after severe storm damage weakened most of the structures. According to local rumors, several inmates disappeared during the evacuation, but the government denied it and sealed the island permanently. Naturally, that only made me more curious. Through a local contact, I managed to arrange a private visit to the island with a maintenance worker named Min Jae. He spoke very little English and seemed uncomfortable the entire time we discussed the trip. Before we left, he told me something strange. "If you hear knocking underground, ignore it." I honestly thought he was joking. The boat ride took nearly 2 hours. Thick fog covered the ocean so heavily that the island didn't appear until we were practically on top of it. The place looked horrifying. Concrete guard towers leaned at dangerous angles, rusted fences disappeared into dead grass, and most of the prison buildings looked like they had been burned from the inside out. The silence out there felt wrong. No birds, no insects, nothing. As soon as we docked, Min Jae unlocked a steel gate and told me we had exactly 3 hours before sunset. After dark, he said quietly, "The tide changes too fast." I followed him through the prison yard while taking photos and notes. Most cell blocks were flooded or collapsed, but one building near the center of the island was still mostly intact. That's where things started becoming strange. Inside the building, I noticed fresh footprints in the dust. Not old footprints, fresh ones. I crouched down to look closer while Min Jae stood frozen near the doorway behind me. The footprints were barefoot and wet. I asked him if someone else had visited recently. He immediately shook his head. No visitors. The deeper we explored, the worse the atmosphere became. Some cell doors had deep scratch marks covering the metal. Others looked bent outward from the inside, as if someone had forced their way out years ago. At one point, I noticed faint knocking sounds echoing somewhere below us. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, rhythmic, almost patient. I looked toward the floor. "There's another level under us?" I asked. Min Jae's face turned pale. "We leave now," he said immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. At the end of the hallway, I discovered a staircase leading underground behind a partially collapsed security gate. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below, carrying a horrible smell like mold, seawater, and something rotten. I turned on my flashlight and started descending before Min Jae could stop me. The underground level was different from the rest of the prison. Older. The walls were stone instead of concrete, and every cell down there had thick iron doors covered with faded symbols scratched into the metal. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the cell doors was slightly open. The knocking stopped. Complete silence filled the corridor. I slowly approached the open cell while my flashlight trembled in my hand. Inside the room sat a metal chair bolted to the floor, and beside it a pile of recent food wrappers and empty water bottles. Someone had been living down there. Very recently. Suddenly I heard Min Jae yelling something in Korean from upstairs. Then came running footsteps. Fast, not his. Several sets of footsteps echoed through the underground hallway around me. I spun around just in time to see movement at the far end of the corridor. Tall figures, thin, human-shaped, standing perfectly still in the darkness, watching me. One of them stepped forward slowly into the flashlight beam. Its head was shaved completely bald, and its skin looked unnaturally pale, almost gray. But its eyes were what terrified me most. They were completely clouded over white, like cataracts. The figure smiled at me. Then every light in the hallway went out at once. I heard screaming somewhere above me. Then the footsteps started running toward me. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I dropped my flashlight and sprinted blindly through the darkness while hands slapped against the walls around me. Something grabbed the back of my jacket for a split second before I tore free and reached the staircase. When I got outside, Minjae was already starting the boat engine. I jumped aboard and we sped away from the island without saying a single word. Halfway back to the mainland, I finally asked him what those people were. He stayed silent for almost a minute before answering. They were never evacuated. That night, I checked into a hotel near the harbor. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those pale faces standing in the darkness underground. Around 2:00 a.m., someone knocked softly on my hotel room door. 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 I froze immediately. Then I heard a wet voice whisper from the hallway outside. "We followed you home." When I was 24, 2 friends and I decided to explore an abandoned medical facility hidden deep inside the forests of northern Pennsylvania. Back then, urban exploration videos were becoming popular online, and we thought it would be fun to document one of the most forgotten places we could find. The building was called Black Hollow Sanatorium. Officially, it had been closed since the late 1970s after multiple reports of patient disappearances and unexplained deaths. Most locals avoided even mentioning the place. Some claimed homeless people lived inside, others believed the forest around it was cursed. Of course, that only made us more interested. My friends Tyler and Mason picked me up around midnight. The sanatorium sat several miles away from the nearest road, hidden beyond thick woods and broken fencing. By the time we parked and reached the property line, it was nearly 2 a.m. The building looked massive in the darkness, 5 stories tall, hundreds of shattered windows, long vines crawling across the walls like veins. And despite being abandoned for decades, there was a faint light glowing somewhere near the top floor. We immediately stopped walking. "You guys see that too, right?" Mason whispered. Nobody answered. We all saw it. A dim yellow light flickering behind one of the upper windows. At first, we assumed it had to be squatters or maybe other explorers, but something about the atmosphere felt wrong. There were no cars nearby, no sounds, no voices, just silence. We entered through a broken side entrance leading into what used to be the children's wing. Old wheelchairs and rusted hospital beds still filled the hallways. The smell inside was horrible, mold, dust, and something damp rotting deep within the walls. Tyler started recording everything on his camera while we explored room after room. Most of the building was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned hospital. Destroyed furniture, graffiti, broken tiles. But the deeper we went, the stranger things became. One hallway on the 3rd floor looked clean, not perfectly clean, but cleaner than the rest of the building. Less dust, less debris, like someone had been walking there regularly. Then Mason found something near one of the rooms, a pile of fresh candles, still warm. That instantly killed whatever excitement we had left. We realized someone else was inside the sanatorium with us, and they were nearby. Tyler suggested leaving immediately, but before we could head back downstairs, we heard something echo from the floor above us. A scream, not loud, not human either. It sounded distorted, almost mechanical. Then came running footsteps. Fast, directly above our heads. We all froze. The footsteps suddenly stopped. Then, one by one, the lights on our floor turned on. Buzz. 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 Old hospital lights flickered overhead despite the building supposedly having no electricity for decades. At the far end of the hallway, a tall figure slowly stepped into view. At first, I thought it was a doctor. It wore something white hanging down to its knees. But then it moved closer. Its arms were too long. Its body looked painfully thin. And where its face should have been, There was only darkness. No eyes, no mouth, just a hollow black shape beneath the flickering lights. Tyler dropped the camera immediately. The figure tilted its head sharply to one side and began walking toward us. Slowly, dragging one leg behind it. Scrape! Scrape! We ran. None of us cared about filming anymore. We sprinted through the hallways while the hospital lights flickered violently around us. Somewhere behind us, metal doors started slamming shut one after another. Bang! 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 It sounded like the entire building was waking up. We reached the stairwell and nearly fell down the steps trying to escape. Halfway to the first floor, Tyler suddenly stopped. His camera was gone. He wanted to go back for it. Mason started screaming at him not to. That's when we heard Tyler's voice echo from upstairs. "Guys, help me." The problem was, Tyler was standing right beside us. Every drop of blood left my body. The voice came again, this time closer. "Please, don't leave me up here." It sounded exactly like Tyler, perfectly, but it was coming from the darkness above us. Then we heard footsteps sprinting down the stairs toward us. Heavy, violent, too fast to be human. We ran out of the building and didn't stop until we reached the car. As Mason started the engine, Tyler suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed toward one of the top floor windows. A figure was standing there watching us. Tall, motionless, its face hidden in darkness. And beside it, another figure slowly stepped into view. Same height, same shape, standing perfectly still beside the first one. Almost like they had been waiting for more people to arrive. We sped out of there and never returned. The next morning, Tyler checked the footage from his camera. Most of the files were corrupted, but the final clip still worked. It showed the empty hospital hallway moments before we ran. At the end of the footage, a voice whispered directly beside the microphone, "You forgot one of us."